right, guys, we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're just going to play around with the paints a little bit, and I'm going to show you a little bit about the difference between the transparent and the opaque paints, as well as how to use your brush and get different types of brush strokes. So let's get started. Now, if you will look at my palette here, I have started laying the paints out. These are actually left over from another painting. And so we're going to replenish those, but I want you to, whenever you put your paints out, don't be skimpy with them and put just a tiny bit out. You need to make sure that you've got a good amount of paint. I usually do kind of a long worm-like shape, and that way I can take the paint off the end. If it gets dirty, I can just cut that off with a palette knife so it's not contaminating the rest of my paints. Plus, you need to make sure that there's plenty of paint out. If you don't have enough paint on your palette, you're not going to be able to get enough paint on your brush. So every time I go into a painting, I put all of my colors out, whether I think I'm going to use them or not. If you're using oils, there's ways that you can keep the oils wet for a few days. I like to grab a little cotton ball, put it in the center of the palette, take some clove oil, a couple of drops on that, put my lid on my Masterson painting box, and that helps to keep the paints from oxidizing as quickly. If you're working in acrylics, if you are using the Golden Open, you can put a little drop of your Golden Open slow drying medium in your paints and close the lid off, and that will also help to keep those lasting a little bit longer. All right, so let's get these paints out. Even though we're just going to be playing around with a few colors, I'm going to go ahead and just get the palette set up like I normally would. So we're taking those tubes and squeezing out good amounts to work with. The white, I will usually put a little extra out because whenever we go into that second layer with the opaques, I tend to use the white mixed with the translucents quite a bit. Now, something else that you might want to consider doing both for acrylics and oils is go ahead and take a Sharpie. My lettering has already worn off a little bit, but if you'll go ahead and write down the initials of each of the colors, it will help you remember what those colors are until you can become really familiar with those. And one way to get very familiar with your palette is to go ahead and put your colors lined up in the same way every time. So if you will look at that palette map that I have included in the course, it looks like this. This is a good PDF handout for you to keep on hand with you as you paint so that you can put your palette lined up in the same way every time. All right, now the difference between the transparent and the opaque paints. So first of all, not all brands are created equally. All right, so here I have Rembrandt. I love the Rembrandt transparent paints. And how I know that they're transparent is that they have this little square, and if the square on it is white, it means it's transparent. If the square is black, it means it's opaque. Now, unfortunately, some companies don't have the square, and sometimes they do the opposite. So I think they're just trying to confuse us. But if you have the Rembrandts, these are really great, good quality artist pigments. And I'm going to also show you how you can tell if they're transparent on the palette here. All right, so let's grab a brush. So this one just happens to be a size 24 Royal Sable Tech by Long Nickel, and it's a bright. And one way that I can tell if it's transparent or opaque is by using some medium. And so if it comes out kind of a clear, pure, watercolory, stained glass looking feel, it's going to be translucent. So I have a mixture here of 50% refined linseed oil and 50% Gamsol, which is my solvent. And I'm just going to take a little bit. So when you're using the medium, this is what we're going to be using on our first layer for every painting. Once we get the first layer and we cover the entire board with transparent color, then we're going to cap off the medium and set it aside. Okay, the same will be true with the acrylics. You're going to be using your Golden Open slow drying medium. If you don't have this particular one, they do have other types of mediums that you can use, but this one just helps to keep the paints wet longer. All right, so I've just barely dipped a little corner of the brush into the medium, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of medium out into my palette. All right, so now I know that all of my translucents are here. And if you'll look at that palette map PDF, you can see that I've outlined the transparent colors so that you can keep those separate from the opaques. So when we're doing a painting and you're first starting out and you're not real familiar with this setup and the difference between your transparents and your opaques, it's a really good idea on that first video, which is layer number 1, to leave off the opaques. So we'll always start by just putting out the transparent colors, okay? Now I have a full palette, and I use a full palette for every painting, pretty much the same colors each time. So we're gonna just pull out one of these translucent colors. So adding medium to that, you can see that that is not cloudy. It's very pure, and it's translucent, kind of like watercolors or stained glass. So if I were to take this and just kind of play around with it, now I've just got a canvas panel up here because it's cheap, and we're just going to play around. So if you want to do the same thing, I would really encourage you to do this and just kind of get a feel of what these paint can do. If I add a little bit more paint and less medium, you can see that it goes a little bit darker. If I add more medium and less paint, then obviously it's going to get a little bit lighter. If I add too much medium, okay, I've just really dipped it in there and it's real soupy, and I'm going to put it on here, and you'll see eventually that that will start to run. So if it's doing that, you know you've got too much medium. Okay, if you pick up that transparent color and you don't have quite enough medium, what's going to happen is it's going to drag. So you can see the difference between this and what we have going on in here. So we want these ranges of light to dark. And it's just going to depend on how saturated you want your color. It doesn't always have to be the same, and you can create lots of variety even with just one color. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up another color. Let's go ahead and just rinse that brush out. So what I do to keep everything clean is first of all, you can see in my paper towel I've got color in there, because what I've done is I've taken the brush between my fingers and just pulled the brush through. So what that does is it keeps your bristles in shape, and it pulls color, excess color, out of the brush, so that keeps it clean. If you don't pull it through your paper towel first and you just stick it into your solvent is going to end up getting really dirty very quickly. So we want to keep our brush clean, we want to keep our solvent clean, and that way keeping the palette clean will help keep the painting nice and vibrant. All right, so we're going to dip in a little bit of medium. Now I dipped in quite a bit, so if you feel like you get too much, like I put the entire brush in, that's probably too much, just dab it onto your paper towel a little bit. And let's just pick up a little magenta here. Beautiful, vibrant color, so you can see that also is a transparent color. It's see-through, it's vibrant, it's watercolory, and it looks kind of like stained glass. And we can come in and add that color and just blend those edges and just have fun with that. Okay, now as I get colors mixed up in my brush, and we'll be doing this throughout the paintings too, I'll take that brush, again, pull the excess out with the paper towel, and then go in and rinse. Just wipe the excess off on the lip of the jar, pull it through the paper towel again, so it's nice and clean, and I'm ready to go in with my next color. So the opposite color of purple tones is yellow. So let's just go ahead and pick up a little bit of this Indian yellow. It's also a transparent color. And you can see that my brush is clean. I didn't pull any magenta into that because I cleaned the brush out really nicely. Just going to add a little bit more pigment. So you can see you can go darker with that by adding more pigment and less medium. And as I paint and put these colors in, if we accidentally touch an edge, sometimes it's fun because it creates these beautiful nuances, but sometimes we want things to stay clean. And so what I'll do is just paint kind of up to those edges. Let's go back in with this yellow again. And I'll try to get as close as I can without touching until the very end. So at the end, we'll just take that color, pull it through the brush. You have a nice dry brush, and then we'll pull those edges together so you have this beautiful blend without pulling it down into the color. I'll stop, I'll pull that color through again, cleaning out the brush, wiping it on the lip, pulling it through the paper towel again. And as you can see, my paper towel is starting to get dirty, so I have to make sure I'm moving that around and getting clean spots on that paper towel. So I can use one paper towel for quite a long time, but I also want to make sure I'm not just wiping color back into my brush. All right, so I'm just taking that dry brush again, coming in, we're blending edges, creating some nice, soft, fun edges. Cleaning that color out, rinsing, wiping again, and finishing off all of those edges. Now, once we have a layer covering the entire white of the surface of the painting, my second step is to go in and put in my darkest values. And we'll get to the opaques in a minute. I know we talked about seeing the difference between transparents and opaques. We're going to get there. I just want to show you this process because this is how I do every painting. These are the steps that I take from beginning to end so that you can learn this technique just like the back of your hand so that it's very easy to have a plan with a painting and jump right in without the intimidation of looking at a blank canvas. So then I'm ready to put in values. So I might have some dark shadows. Winsor violet or dioxazine purple is a really good color for dark values. So we're just going to use that one for this instance. And I'm not adding medium now because I've got color all over my board, so it's not necessary for me to add any more medium because the medium is already on the board. And I'm wanting to go darker now, so if I add medium to this, it's going to lighten it up. So I want to keep this fairly dark. So let's just say we've got some dark shadows and values down in through here. We'll just create kind of a circular shape. And I'm wanting to make sure that stays nice and dark. So I'm going to take that color and wipe it out of the brush. And as you can see, my paper towel is quite full. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it out. So I always have just a little, like a shopping bag, plastic bag that I put those in. And then at the end of the day, I'll put them in my metal can for safety. All right, so again, I'm wiping that color out of the brush, and then maybe you can go back with the dry brush again and kind of blend and soften some of those edges. All right, so this is what we call the first layer, the transparent layer. We've put our color on, we've added our dark values, and then we would go into video number 2 and start working with our opaque colors. So what you're going to do in between is go ahead and get rid of all of this oily residue. So I'm just going to use my flat palette knife, and I'm just going to scrape that up into the paper towel. You can do this with acrylics as well. See, that's got a lot of medium on the palette, and I'm wanting to make sure we get rid of all of that. When we go into the second layer with the opaques, the paint is going to start to get a little bit thicker. So this layer here, you can see it's like watercolor. It's very thin, and it doesn't stick up off the surface. As we build, we work fat over lean, and that just means thick over thin. Okay, and so the medium, it's got linseed oil in it, and it's got solvent. It thins the paints down, and now we're gonna start building up the thickness of the paint. Okay, so how can we tell that these are opaque colors? Before we get in and start playing around on our canvas again, I'm just going to show you what happens if we take this color, and even with a little bit of medium, it'll thin it down, but you can still see it's pretty opaque. So you can't really see through it. Now, if you're working with the Golden Open acrylics and you've got these cadmium colors or these opaque colors, those Golden Opens are not as opaque as the oils or some of the other brands of acrylic. You could even use just regular golden paints that are not the open, and those opaque paints will be more opaque. So their cads, whites, etc., are more of a semi-opaque. So what I would suggest doing, those of you working in acrylics, and if you've already got your Golden Open paints, it's totally fine. You can work with those. Okay, so if you have, for example, a Winsor & Newton professional acrylic, so this is the Cad Yellow or the Cad Lemon, and this one is much more opaque than the Golden Open. So if you wanted to use the Golden Open for your transparents and then use a different brand of acrylics for the opaques, you're welcome to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and clean this off because we're not going to be using the medium with the opaque colors. So I am going to go ahead and scrape that off because we don't want that medium getting mixed into that top layer of paint. Okay, and I'll just take the paper towel and wipe off whatever excess is there. And what I need to do next is go ahead and pull all of that Cad red light out of the brush. So I pulled it out and now I'm rinsing it in the solvent. Okay, if you can get into the habit of doing that, holding your paper towel in one hand. So I always have this one in my hand, that way I'm not tempted to come in and start doing this number. What that's going to do is break the bristles on your brush and cause your bristles to fray, and your brush isn't going to last as long. Okay, so when we're ready to start popping in colors on top of this, I do work on a wet surface. That bottom layer will stay wet for quite some time. If you're using acrylics and you feel like it's starting to dry, you can take a spritz bottle and spritz a little water on there, and that will actually reactivate those Golden Opens. So that's a really cool feature for those paints. All right, so with the opaque layer, what I'm going to do is take the paint. You can see how I took a big glob of paint and I brought it out into the middle of the palette. So say I wanted to mix up some ice blue with my Cad Yellow Deep. Now notice I didn't take that and dump it right in the top of or the pile of the CAD yellow deep. What I did was I took another big glop and I placed it next to it. That way I can kind of slowly pull those colors together until I get the color I want. It's much easier to do it that way rather than taking it and plopping it right in the middle of your pile. Now I've got a lot of good thick paint here, so you want to make sure that you are not skimpy with your paints. You want to mix up quite a bit. And if you're wanting to put on a thin layer, notice I'm holding my brush vertical and I'm not mushing the bristles into the palette. Okay, I'm holding it vertical to kind of mix the colors. And then I can just pull some of that color up and watch what happens. If I take my brush and I'm pushing in perpendicular, you can't get a lot of thick paint onto your brush. What's happening is it's pushing it into the surface of the painting. The other thing that's happening is it's starting to mix with that undertone. Now that's fine, you can do that if that's the look that you're going for. But if you're wanting to have a thicker layer of paint and you want to actually see some of the vibrant colors show through, what you can do is take your brush and scoop that paint up kind of like you would a shovel if you're shoveling snow. And you can see that that has a good bead of paint on the tip of the brush. It hasn't pushed up into the ferrule. I've kept it at the bottom of the brush, and then I'm going to flip it over. Instead of holding my brush vertical against the surface or perpendicular against the surface, I'm going to lay it more horizontally, and I'm going to take that color and pull it across the surface. So you can see little bits of color poking through, and you've got this nice thick stroke. And you can take it and then just kind of soften some of those edges. But you can see how thick that is compared to doing it like this. You can see that's not leaving much paint or allowing paint to offload onto your painting. So what I would suggest you doing is trying out some different brushes and use these brights and see how many different types of brush strokes you can make. These brushes are really versatile. I really love that you can come in and do really thick lines, thin lines. You can use the corner of the brush. Okay, so I'm just picking up some of this CAD orange here. You can use any color you want. And let's just see what we can do. So if I take just the corner of the brush, I can make little bitty marks and I can scoot around, I can flip the brush over and just get some fun little lines. Now as I keep going, obviously there's less paint and it's going to start mixing in more with what you have on the surface of the board. Okay, another thing that you can do, notice I just wiped that brush off because I picked up some of the other colors in there. But you can see, even though orange and blue are opposites on the color wheel, and I'm just going to pop that color wheel right up on the screen here so you can see if you go directly across from orange to blue, they're complete opposites. So that just means that they're complements. If you place them next to each other, you see how bright and vivid that orange is up against the blue. It's a great way to get the brightest, most vibrant color that you can if you'll place those opposite colors next to each other. If you look at this purple and yellow, they're very vibrant up next to each other. But you can see those opposite colors as they were mixing together, they started to dull. So if you want to dull a color down, just pull in some of its opposite color and that will dull it down. Same thing is true here with this orange and the blue. You can see as those colors mix, they tend to go more neutral. All right, let's look at some other ways to get different types of brush strokes. So I'm just cleaning the brush out and wiping it really good. I'm just going to come in with some of this CAD red light. Notice I picked up a bunch of paint, but I'm not just going to pick it up and slap it on the surface because I don't really have control over what's going to happen when it's such a big glop like that. So what I'll do is I'll pick it up, move it to my mixing area, and then I'm going to just evenly distribute that in the bristles of the brush. So you can see how I'm holding the brush. I'm pulling it back and forth. I'm not doing this, trying to mix. Okay, I'm really being very mindful about how I am mixing those colors. I'm holding my brush vertical, perpendicular against the surface, and that's keeping the paint down low on the bristles so that they can offload. If they're getting all mushed up into the ferrule, it's going to be really hard to get that paint off the brush onto the surface. All right, so now we can take this brush and we can go with maybe like a really big wide stroke. And then I can take it and I can turn the brush and I can get more narrow and I can move it around. If I push harder, I'm going to go wider. So you can see there's lots of ways to get the strokes that you need. If you need to work on a detailed area, you can scoop up plenty of paint. Make sure you've got that beaded up on your brush. And again, take the corner of the brush and you can get little teeny tiny marks with this big brush. So this is a 24, so it's a pretty good size brush. I can even do this with my 30 just by using the corner of the brush. So really versatile. You can take the side of it and you can go vertical if you wanted to get in and get a nice line. A nice narrow thin line. Okay, so just play around with it and see what you can do. It's a great brush, it's versatile, and it's going to help if you become familiar with your brushes, see how they work for you, and you'll have lots of success.